Welcome to our deep dive all about screens and autism.
Yeah.
Um, we've got a really interesting collection of research articles and advice from parents,
hmm
all about how screen time really affects autistic children.
Yeah, and it's not as simple as just like screens are good or screens are bad.
Right.
This deep dive is going to kind of get into like what makes screens so appealing,
hmm
for autistic kids.
Yeah,
We're going to look at the pluses and minuses and what research is saying about how screens affect development.
absolutely. And we're gonna give you guys listening some advice and some strategies.
Yeah.
So let's jump right into those reasons why screens just seem to like draw autistic children in.
hmm
The sources outline like 6 key factors, and then the first one is this element of predictability and control,
Right.
which we know a lot of autistic children really crave.
Yeah, and they provide that like in spades.
Yeah.
Like you hit play, you know exactly what's going to happen.
Yep.
Rewind, pause, replay. It's always the same.
Yep.
And, that's completely different from how unpredictable real life interactions are,
Right.
which can be, overwhelming and make you anxious
Yes.
when you really need routine and structure.
And especially for someone who thrives on that,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
almost like a haven from chaos.
hmm
And speaking of sensory experiences, we can't forget about just how visually appealing screens are.
Oh, yeah.
The bright colors, captivating motion.
The animations.
It's like endless animations. It's
Yeah.
a visual learner's paradise.
Totally. And it makes sense, because so many autistic children are drawn to that style of learning.
Yeah.
And this kind of ties into the next point, too, about limited social demands.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
screens, they give you engagement entertainment
Yep.
without having to, deal with face-to-face communication.
Yeah. There's no need to try to decipher, social cues
Yeah.
or navigate all the unpredictability of like
Right.
social interaction. It's a space to connect and not feel that pressure to, conform to
Mhm.
social expectations.
Totally.
Okay, so then we can add in this element of like hyperfocus and special interests.
Yeah.
Autistic children often have these, deep passions. They love to explore intensely, and screens provide a portal to endless information
Right.
and engagement on any topic you can imagine.
It's like a buffet for the curious mind.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And this leads us to like repetitive patterns and sounds,
Mhm.
another element that seems to really resonate with autistic children,
Yeah.
whether it's like looping videos, predictable soundtracks in games,
Yeah.
or the, satisfying repetition of certain app mechanics. It just taps into that love of routine and predictability.
Yeah, think about those, those videos of kinetic sand
Right.
being cut and molded over and over, or the, like the repetition of sorting things by color and shape.
Yes.
And these digital versions sort of tap into those same like
Yeah.
soothing sensory experiences.
It's like a digital comfort blanket almost.
Yeah.
And lastly, we have to remember this idea of escaping overstimulation.
hmm
The world can feel really intense and overwhelming
Yeah.
for autistic children with
Mm.
just, this barrage of sensory input,
Yeah.
competing for attention, and screens kind of offer a way to control that input, to step back
Right.
and regulate that sensory experience.
Yeah, you can like dim the lights,
Yeah.
pick calming visuals and sounds. You control the information.
Right.
But this does bring us to kind of an important point.
Okay.
This escape, while it can be good,
Yeah.
needs to be balanced.
Yeah, and that's where the research gets really eye-opening.
Yeah.
There was a study recently that was published in JAMA Network Open,
hmm
and they actually found a link between increased screen time and more severe ASD symptoms. And it wasn't just any symptom. Like, the study specifically pointed to sensory issues as a big area of concern.
Right.
They even suggest that it could impact brain development
hmm
in the regions that are associated with sensory processing.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting from like a neurological perspective.
Yeah.
The study suggests that in too much screen time,
Right.
especially when the brain is still developing,
Yes.
might be overstimulating some of those neural pathways
Right.
while neglecting others.
Yeah.
And that could really affect how the brain processes information.
Yeah, so we're not just talking about being glued to a screen,
Right.
but like potentially affecting how an autistic child actually experiences the world.
Yeah.
Around them, it makes you think about those early childhood interventions where, you use specific sensory experiences to shape neural pathways.
Yeah.
But this time it's screen time that's potentially influencing those same pathways.
Yeah. That's a great analogy.
Right.
And it shows how we need to move beyond that simple idea of like, oh, screens are bad.
Mm-hmm.
And really look at how screen time, especially the content and the timing,
Right.
might be interacting with a developing brain. An autistic developing brain.
Absolutely.
It's much more complex than just good or bad.
Yes.
Yeah, it really does show how complicated this is.
Yeah.
Screens can give autistic kids a feeling of control and predictability,
Mm-hmm.
which we know can be so helpful for them.
Right.
But we also have to be aware of how it could affect their sensory processing and brain development.
It's like we're walking this tightrope,
Yeah,
trying to find that perfect balance where screens can be a good tool,
right.
but not, tip the scales and cause harm.
Exactly, like a double-edged sword.
Yes, exactly.
And that leads us to, looking at the good and the bad of screen time for autistic kids.
Okay.
On one hand, we can't ignore the amazing educational opportunities that screens can provide.
Yeah.
Think about those apps that teach everything from reading and math
Right.
to even social skills and emotional regulation.
And for kids who don't speak,
Yeah.
communication apps can be life-changing.
Oh,
Giving them a way to express themselves and connect can open up a whole new world for them.
Yeah, the sources actually highlight a specific app called Proloquogo
Okay.
that's been really successful in helping nonverbal autistic children communicate.
That's amazing.
It's a great example of how we can use technology to help empower autistic individuals.
Mm.
And beyond those specific examples, even just having that predictable, controlled environment that screens offer can be a huge benefit.
Right.
We've talked about how that can reduce anxiety and create a sense of safety,
Yes.
which is really valuable for kids who maybe struggle with changes in routine.
So in a way, we're using those things that draw autistic children to screens,
Yeah.
the predictability, the visual stimulation, the control, and we're turning them into tools for learning and development.
Exactly. But that's where that double-edged sword comes back around.
Okay.
While we can celebrate those benefits,
Right.
we can't ignore the potential downsides.
Yeah. What are some of those?
One of the biggest worries is how it affects social skill development. If a child spends most of their time in the digital world, are they missing out on practicing face-to-face interactions?
It makes you wonder if they're learning those little things about nonverbal communication, the
Right.
give and take of a conversation,
Yeah.
how to read social cues in real time.
Exactly, and that's a valid concern.
Yeah.
Human connection is so important for healthy development. And while screens can help with certain types of communication,
Right.
they can't fully replace real human interaction.
It's like learning a language from a textbook
Uh-huh.
versus actually living in a place where you have to speak that language every day.
Right.
The textbook gives you the basics,
Yeah.
but the real learning happens in those messy, real-life conversations.
And then there's the issue of physical health.
Okay.
More screen time usually means being more sedentary.
Yeah.
And we know that's linked to a lot of health risks.
Like what kind of risks?
Obesity, cardiovascular problems, even problems with your muscles and bones from bad posture.
Oh.
And it's not just the physical risks.
Right.
Too much screen time, especially close to bedtime,
Yeah.
can mess with sleep patterns.
That's because of the blue light that screens give off, right?
Exactly. It messes with our melatonin
Well,
production.
Okay.
And we all know how important sleep is,
Mm-hmm.
but it's especially important for kids who are still developing.
Right.
Not getting enough sleep can affect mood attention learning,
Wow.
even your immune system.
So there are a lot of factors we need to consider.
Yeah,
We can't ignore the good things about screens,
right.
but we also can't ignore the risks.
Exactly. It's all about finding a balance.
And that's where the advice for parents comes in, right?
Absolutely. The sources offer a bunch of practical strategies for managing screen time effectively.
Okay.
And what I like is that they emphasize the importance of finding what works best for each child.
Right. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. So let's get into some of those strategies,
Okay.
starting with clear boundaries. The sources really stress setting clear limits and actually sticking to them.
Consistency is key.
Yes, kids do well with predictability.
Right.
And when the rules about screen time are always changing,
Yeah.
it can lead to confusion, frustration, even meltdowns.
It's like having a visual schedule,
Yeah.
but for screen time.
Exactly. It gives them that structure and predictability that so many autistic kids need.
So things like visual timers, set schedules, maybe a chart that shows when screen time is allowed and when it's not.
Yeah, and I bet it would be helpful to involve the child in making those boundaries.
I think so too.
The more involved they are,
Yeah.
the more they'll feel like it's their own thing,
Right.
and they'll be more likely to cooperate.
It's about working together, not just telling them what to do.
Exactly. And speaking of being engaged,
Yeah.
another strategy is to offer other things to do.
Okay.
If screens are the only way they can have fun,
Right.
it's going to be really hard to manage screen time.
So it's about having lots of other fun options ready. Things like sensory toys, art supplies, building blocks, puzzles, books, maybe even things like nature walks or trips to the park.
Exactly. It's about having balance so that screens aren't the only choice.
And this also ties into being a good role model.
Oh, absolutely.
Kids learn by watching the adults in their lives.
Yeah.
If parents are always on their phones or tablets, it sends a mixed message. It's like saying, do as I say, not as I do.
Right.
Which never really works.
Especially with kids.
So being mindful of our own screen use can be really powerful.
Yeah, it shows them what healthy habits look like.
Okay, so what about those times when screen time has already become a habit
Yeah.
and you need to cut back?
The sources suggest taking a gradual approach.
Okay.
Instead of suddenly taking away all screen time, try reducing it a little bit at a time.
Okay.
Maybe 5 or 10 minutes less each week.
Yeah.
That way the child can adjust slowly,
Right.
and you're less likely to have resistance or meltdowns.
It's like weaning someone off of something.
Sure. Yeah, you don't want to shock the system.
Right. It's about making small changes towards a healthier lifestyle.
Exactly. Now,
Yeah.
one strategy I found interesting,
Yeah.
and maybe a little controversial,
Oh.
is the idea of using screen time as a reward.
Okay. I can see how that could be tricky.
It is, you have to be careful with this one.
Mm-hmm.
For some kids who are really motivated by screens,
Yeah.
it could be a good way to encourage good behavior.
Okay.
Like maybe they earn extra screen time for doing chores,
Right.
or practicing an instrument, or even just talking to someone.
So it's like positive reinforcement.
Exactly.
Right.
You're connecting screen time with something good
Yeah.
and encouraging those behaviors.
But I can also see how it could backfire.
Oh, yeah?
If screen time becomes the only reward,
Uh-huh.
are we making them too dependent on it?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to be careful with this approach and watch closely.
Right.
It's also important to offer other types of rewards, not just screen time.
So they don't just focus on getting screen time?
Yeah, we want to encourage them to do things because they enjoy them.
Okay, so it's about using screen time strategically.
Exactly. Not as the automatic reward for everything they do well.
Okay. And the sources also talk about using parental controls.
Oh, absolutely. Technology can be a big help in managing screen time.
Yeah.
Most devices now come with features like time limits,
Right.
app restrictions, and content filters.
That's great.
These tools let parents create a safer online world, limiting what their kids see and setting boundaries around screen time.
It's like a digital babysitter.
Exactly. But what about when you can't be right there to watch what they're doing?
Yeah, that's a good question.
The sources talk about visual supports being really helpful for managing screen time.
Okay. And why are those helpful?
Well, visual supports are great for autistic kids
Mm-hmm.
because they provide clarity, predictability, and a sense of control.
Right.
And when it comes to screen time,
Yeah.
there are some really creative and effective ways to use visual strategies.
Okay, so tell me more about these visual support ideas.
Sure. What are some examples?
One popular strategy is using screen time token boards.
Okay. How does that work?
You give the child a certain number of tokens,
Mm-hmm.
and each token represents a specific amount of screen time.
Okay.
As they use their screen time,
Yeah.
they give you back a token,
Mm-hmm.
and once they're out of tokens, screen time is over.
That's a really smart way to make those time limits more concrete and easier to understand.
Right. What other visual strategies did the sources suggest?
Yeah. What else?
Another great tool is social stories.
Okay.
These are personalized stories that explain ideas and expectations
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's easy for autistic children to understand.
I like that.
So you could create a story about a character who loves screen time,
Okay.
but learns why it's important to have balance and set limits.
It's like teaching a life lesson through a story.
Exactly. I love that approach too.
Are there any other visual tools that parents can use?
Oh yeah, the classic red-green chart can be surprisingly effective.
All right.
Green means go screens are allowed.
Red means stop. It's time to turn off the screen.
Okay.
You can even set a timer to change the chart from green to red.
Right.
That gives them a clear signal that screen time is over.
It's like a traffic light for screen time.
Exactly.
So simple, but so effective.
And speaking of self-regulation, the sources also talk about teaching those skills,
Okay.
specifically around screen use.
Yeah. How do you teach that?
One technique they mentioned is called pause and reflect.
Okay.
You encourage the child to take breaks,
Mm-hmm.
maybe every 15 or 20 minutes,
Okay.
to check in with themselves.
Okay.
How are they feeling?
Yeah, are they getting frustrated or tired?
Exactly. It helps them connect how they're feeling with how much screen time they're having
Yeah.
and recognize when they need a break.
It's like a built-in emotional check for their screen time.
Exactly. And another technique is gradually increasing the amount of time they spend away from screens each day.
So start with short breaks.
Yeah, maybe like 5 minutes at first,
Okay.
and then slowly make them longer.
That helps them get used to not having screens around.
Right.
And gives them more time for other activities.
It's all about those baby steps, making those small changes toward a more balanced life.
But let's be real, screens are part of our lives.
They're not going away.
And in some ways, they can be a good thing for autistic children.
I agree. And that brings us to something that really surprised me when I was looking at the source material.
Okay, what was that?
The sheer number of apps designed specifically for autistic children.
Wow, I imagine it can be overwhelming for parents.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to figure out which apps are good.
Absolutely. Where do you even start?
That's where being picky and focusing on your child's needs comes in.
Okay.
Not all apps are created equal.
What works for one kid might not work for another.
So you have to carefully research the apps.
Yeah.
And pick the ones that really fit your child's needs and interests.
Exactly. And to give you an idea of what's out there, the sources highlight a few really good examples.
Okay, let's hear about them.
For communication, we already talked about Prolocro2Go, which is great for nonverbal children.
Yeah.
But there's also an app called Model Me Going Places Too.
Okay.
That uses visuals to teach social skills for different situations.
Like a virtual social skills coach.
Exactly.
That's amazing. What about apps for sensory regulation?
There's one called Sensory App House.
Oh, okay.
That has calming visuals and interactive sensory activities.
Oh, that's nice.
It's like a digital toolkit for managing sensory input.
I like that. And for kids who like routine and structure,
Yeah.
the sources mention an app called ChoiceWorks that helps with creating visual schedules and reward systems.
Exactly. It can help manage daily tasks and transitions.
It's like a digital life organizer.
It is, and these are just a few examples. There's a whole world of apps out there to explore.
Wow.
Each one with its own unique benefits. Right.
I'd love to hear about some others that you found interesting.
Okay, well, there's an app called Starfall
Okay.
that's really good for early literacy skills.
Oh, cool.
It uses fun animations and games to teach things like phonics, reading, and math.
So it's like learning disguised as fun.
Exactly what other apps stood out to you?
Well, I'm really curious about apps for kids who have trouble with social situations.
Okay, well, there's one called Social Detective
Okay.
that uses real-life examples and interactive exercises to teach social skills, like recognizing emotions,
Okay.
understanding body language, and how to have conversations.
So it's like a pocket-sized social skills coach.
Exactly.
It's amazing that there are so many apps designed to help autistic children.
It really shows how powerful technology can be when it's used the right way.
Yeah. And while we've mentioned a few already, so it seems like the main takeaway here is that while screen time can be complicated and challenging for parents of autistic children, it's not something to be afraid of or avoid completely.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance.
Yeah.
Understanding how screen time affects kids.
Right.
And using technology to help your child grow and develop.
And it's about giving yourself the knowledge and tools to handle this digital world with confidence.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot in this deep dive.
Yeah.
Looking at what makes screens so appealing, the science behind how they affect us,
Right.
and a bunch of practical tips for parents.
As we wrap up this section, I'm curious,
Yeah.
what's resonating with you the most so far?
For me, it's remembering that technology itself isn't the bad guy.
Right.
It's about how we use it, how we manage it, and making sure it's helping our kids.
I love that perspective.
Yeah.
It's not about saying screens are evil.
Right.
It's about using them for good.
Exactly.
And for you listening, what's standing out to you as helpful or insightful?
Yeah, it's been fascinating talking about all these strategies and realizing how much control we really have as parents.
Yeah.
It's not about just letting the screen take over. It's about, like you said, we're the ones shaping their digital world.
It can be hard for parents to know which apps are actually worth downloading.
It definitely takes some research. You can't just download any app that says it's good for autism.
Right.
You need to be picky. Read reviews
Yeah.
and make smart choices.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into screens and autism, I want to leave you with this thought: knowledge is power. The more we know about screen time and how it affects autistic children,
Right.
the better we can make decisions
Yeah.
and create a healthy, balanced digital world for our kids.
And remember, you don't have to do this alone.
Yeah, that's so important.
There are tons of resources out there. There are support groups, therapists,
Yeah.
other parents who are going through the same things.
So if you're feeling lost, reach out for help.
Absolutely.
And we want to hear from you too.
Yes.
Share your experiences, your questions, your successes, your struggles. Let's keep talking about this and support each other.
Because in the end, it's all about helping our children thrive in a world that's so focused on technology.
Yes.
And by working together, sharing what we know, and finding that balance,
Right.
we can help them navigate this world with confidence and well-being.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
It's been a really insightful conversation.
I agree.
And to everyone listening, thanks for tuning in.
We'll see you next time.